Glad to be here going through this process with everybody. I'm Dina Dawson, the State Elections Director, and I'm going to turn it over to Carol to walk us through housekeeping, and we'll get us started.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carol Moreno, and today I'm just going to give a quick reminder that this Rules Advisory Committee meeting is being recorded, and we do post these recordings on our website. We've also been posting copies of our presentations on there as well. So if members of the public want to review any of the slides that we're sharing today, you can find those on our website following this meeting. And a quick reminder that if anything is put into the chat, our facilitators will read that out loud since members of the public don't have that ability to see it through our current team settings. And we'll have some wrap ups at the end of this meeting today to sort of talk about next steps of the Rules Advisory timeline as well. But for now, we'll throw it over with introductions. So I'll start off by passing it to And.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, everybody, for being here. My name is Ann Burke-Jones. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Elections Administration Manager here at State Elections. And I will pass it around. Let's see. Let's start with Tracy this morning.
Good morning, all. Tracy Kremenko, Clatsop County Clerk, representative for the Oregon Association of County Clerks. Use she, her pronouns. And I'll pass it off to Michelle.
Good morning. I'm Michelle Godin. I work as a TSR1 at the Coos Bay DMV. I'm also the president of our sublocal for SEIU. I go by she, her pronouns, and we'll go to Ulysses.
Hey, thank you, Michelle. My name is Ulysses Santillano Claseca. I'm a program coordinator here with the Innovation Law Lab. I use he, him, el pronouns, and I'll pass it along to Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat Schwartz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the voter registration analyst with ODOT and DMV, and I'll pass to Dina.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Dina Dawson, she, her pronouns, State Elections Director for Oregon. And I think that fills out the rack so far for this morning. So, and get us started, please.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate everyone introducing themselves. Carol, we can go ahead and bring up the slideshow and get started. So hopefully RAC members are aware we are a little bit ahead of our anticipated schedule. So we expect today to be we should be able to finish reviewing all of the drafted rules today, and then we will be soliciting RAC members for their feedback and comments before continuing on with the process. So we will get started today. We're starting off again. Last week we covered the voter registration activities during covered transactions at DMV. Today we're going to start with the data transfers between Department of Motor Vehicles and the Secretary of State, and continue on through the OMV processing done by the Secretary of State and the counties. So without further ado, we'll just get going. Again, I will remind everybody on the RAC, the whole purpose of having you here is to have feedback and comments. And so as we're working through these rules, please feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, and we would like to have that feedback. So
actually,
go ahead,
I can't find the raise hand function, sorry. I did want to point out, I'm sorry, I haven't said this before, but we're actually the Driver and Motor Vehicle Services Division because we're not a department. So the department that manages us is ODOT. So wanted to point that out.
Thank you. We will get division in there instead of department. I appreciate that correction. Making a note there. All right. So transferring data between the Division of Motor Vehicles and the Secretary of State. Within 3 business days of a covered transaction, the DMV shall make available to the Secretary of State voter registration information for qualified individuals. Electronic records provided by the DMV for OMV are classified as level 4 restricted pursuant to Secretary of State agency policy. The DMV and the Secretary of State shall enter into an interagency agreement which covers the following: File notifications, including failure notifications, daily control file policies, non-OMV data exchanges that are including but not limited to, here on the next slide, we'll have a selection of those. The HAVA file, which is the Help America Vote Act file. That's kind of what we refer to it. It's essentially the snapshot of DMV's database that we use to compare against the voter registration database. Online voter registration data, electronic DMV voter registration, it's the EDVR process, and then changes of address.
Is the online voter registration, is that a new file or is it one I just am not recognizing?
No, it's not. Thanks, Kat, for asking. It is not a new file. Actually, so far in this section, I don't think there has been anything new other than the 5 calendar days that were previously allowed for the data to be available. It's now 3 business days, which is an extra day, what the standard process is, but we're just kind of trying to make it consistent with defining business days for all these timelines. And we currently, just for the group as well, we currently have an interagency agreement that covers these things as well. We are proposing that we expand that agreement a little bit more, specifically around the controls and the audits that have been put in place by the agencies within this last calendar year. So that, I think that is the only new stuff that we are proposing in this particular piece of the rules. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So the OMV data file prepared by the DMV shall include the following: full name, date of birth, residence address, mailing address, if any, the date of the DMV cover transaction, and the legal presence indicator. And then finally, the DMV and Secretary of State shall ensure that information regarding citizenship and immigration status contained in OMV files remains confidential in compliance with Oregon Revised Statute 180-805 to ORS 180-810 and any applicable policies. That is the file transfer section. So yeah, not a whole lot of changes there, just trying to be a little bit more precise. And then now we'll continue with the OMV file processing that happens at the Secretary of State's office. Actually, Carol, if we can go back one slide. Okay. So upon receipt of OMV data files from the DMV, the SOS shall compare the qualified individuals listed in the DMV files to individuals who have registration records in Oregon's centralized voter registration system. So this is the matching process that we've talked about before. Qualified individuals who previously opted out of OMV are included in the matching process. So we will want to look to see if those individuals have records. If a qualified individual who previously opted out has a voter registration record, then their OMV data will be processed. So even if they had previously opted out, if they had since registered through another means, we're going to add them to the matching process so that if there's a change of address or an update, we would have that information to pass along to the counties. Okay, we can move on. If a qualified individual who previously opted out does not have a voter registration record, they will be excluded from the OMV process. So that would be us honoring that previous opt-out. Current records in the OCVR system marked as confidential will be included in the OMV matching process. And at the conclusion of the matching process and immediately after receipts of the electronic signature, the SOS shall make OMV data available to counties pursuant to ORS 247-017.
On that confidential piece, I know when I've talked with clerks, they've been concerned about, especially elected officials maybe getting unaffiliated. And is this getting addressed, or is it just still the same process here?
Yeah, thanks, Kat, for bringing that up. That's exactly the purpose of calling out that confidential voters would be included in the matching process. Currently, they haven't been included. And so if a confidential voter, they don't compare to see if that that voter has a confidential record on file, which means they go through the OMB process and essentially get processed as a new non-affiliated voter if they take no action. And that's that situation where sometimes a confidential voter has a new record that causes their information to be updated. So yes, that's exactly what we're trying to address, to where our office would make sure that we're comparing to those folks to make sure that they're not included in the process if they don't need to be. Okay. OMV notification. So the Secretary of State shall notify each new OMV participant of the process to decline being registered as an elector and adopt a political party. The Secretary of State shall provide a print vendor with a file to generate the OMV notification not later than 3 business days after receipt of the file from the DMV. So that's a new provision that we added to put the same time frame on our office that we've put on DMV, that we process those files within 3 business days. The 21-day notification period will begin the day after the print vendor receives the data from the Secretary of State pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute 247-017. The notification will be sent by forwardable mail with a postage paid pre-addressed return envelope. And again, I'll call out that's a change. Currently, they're sent by non-forwardable mail, but the feedback has been to prioritize getting in contact with the individual. So we will start sending those by forwardable mail. And then the Secretary of State shall facilitate the delivery of returned notices to counties. And then in addition to the requirements in, which would be this rule, this Oregon OAR 165.005.0170, the OMV notification shall include registration qualifications, the penalties for registering when not qualified, alternative options to register to vote, an opportunity to register to vote within the 21-day period, and then a space for the OMV participant to include contact information.
I have a question on that last
Yes,
piece.
please.
Is that including emails and phone numbers, or is that just like an address?
Yes, that's exactly what we were going to ask for is emails or phone numbers. The purpose is to give those local election officials contact information to then reach out to the voter if they need to.
I just want to pause this here for a second to highlight this. This is all directly from the RAC. The desire to have contact information was mentioned, and then also the desire to notify OMV qualified individuals what the penalties for registering when not qualified are. So just wanted to flag those, that these rules are being directly informed by the discussions that we've had earlier. And we kind of rolled over a major change without much fanfare. But this is a significant change to the process where currently the Secretary of State's office is administering the 21-day period and then notifying the clerks at the end of the 21 days. But a couple of slides ago, and now in compliance with the ORS 247-017, ORS says that immediately upon receiving the information, it's transmitted to the clerks. So as Ann moves forward through the next couple of slides, it'll make sense as to why clerks are responding or acting in the way that is all brand new. So thank you, Ann.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. That's a great flag and perfect timing as we move into the county OMV file processing. Because yeah, that change seemed a little subtle in the last section, but we'll expand on it here in the next slide. Okay, Carol, yeah, we can go to the next one. Here we go. Okay, so county Oregon motor voter file processing. Upon receipt of OMV file data from the Secretary of State, county shall create a pending OMV voter registration record for each record in the file. All records in OMV pending status are exempt from public disclosure under ORS 247-940 or ORS 247-945, as OMV individuals are not considered to be added to the registration list until at least 21 calendar days after the OMV notification is provided pursuant to ORS 247-017-4. So yes, this, as Dina was saying, this is a new process. So instead of waiting until that 21-day maturation period is completely over, we're going to send the data at the beginning of that maturation period so that county local election officials can see those records, they can process them as pending, and then they have visibility in case any of those individuals contact their office during that 21 days leading up to the maturation period. So we'll break down the processing a little bit more. Here in the next slide. County shall process returned OMV declinations as followed. A declination on or before the 21st day will change the status from pending to not registered. Records in a not registered status are exempt from public disclosure under ORS 247-940 or ORS 247-945. So they can still opt out during that 21-day period, and if they do, they will be their status will be, it'll be a special status of not registered where they were never officially added to the voter rolls. And continue on. Counties, a declination on or after the 22nd day, they will change their status from pending to canceled. And then if there's ambiguous or incomplete declination, the county shall contact the voter by the voter's preferred contact method if provided to obtain clarifying information. And then upon the OMV maturation deadline, OMV electors shall be added to the registration list. And the Secretary of State shall provide OMV processing instructions to counties. One more here around this section. If an OMV elector returns a voter registration form within the 21-day notification period, the county shall process it following standard voter registration application process. So this is just calling out that during that 21 days, they can always register using another means. They can go online and register to vote. They could use the card that's sent in the mailer, or something to register prior to that 21 days. So just calling that option out. Any questions on this section? Any feedback here before we move on?
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding it. So if they go through the OMV process and they return the card back within the 21 days, they still have to wait till that 21st day to be registered as a voter. Is that my understanding?
No, if they return that, so if they return a card to register, to complete a voter registration, it would be active the day they return that card.
Okay. It's if they don't respond at all?
Correct. Yeah. If they take no action, then within 21 days, that record would mature, and then they would be registered as a non-affiliated voter.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we got a couple more slides here, kind of building on the previous section. OMV list maintenance, audits, and escalation methods. So the DMV and SOS shall enter into an interagency agreement, which covers the Secretary of State initiated monthly audit, including a random sampling of OMV records, defined escalation path for discrepancies with nightly file counts, defined escalation path for Secretary of State to notify DMV of errors with OMV records, and a defined escalation path for DMV to notice we already did. Oh, sorry. It's the other way around. So SOS notifying DMV with subsection C. D is defined escalation path for DMV to notify the Secretary of State of errors with OMV records. And then also Secretary of State initiated list maintenance procedures. And then the DMV and Secretary of State shall ensure that information regarding citizenship and immigration status contained in OMV files remains confidential in compliance with ORS 180-805 to ORS 180-810 and any applicable policies.
So we're wanting to put this into the current, or we already have an IAA, so we're adding this into the current one. It's not a separate one to deal with escalation. Okay.
Yes, absolutely, Kat. Thanks for including that. So we currently have these procedures in place. We just don't have them formalized in the interagency agreement. So that's all we're calling out for, is to formalize them.
I guess I'm confused. I recognize everything but the SOS initiated list maintenance. What does that mean?
I'm happy to jump in there.
Yeah, thanks.
This will be just like list maintenance is done at the county level for maintaining data and auditing data. This will be a collaborative approach to addressing legacy errors at the DMV. So we want to formalize what that process is going to be through the IAA. And so we just want to call it out in rule. That way we can point to the IAA, and we're really addressing all of the audit findings from the Baker Tilly audit here.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the rules. We have a couple statements here to review. As part of administrative rules, we'll also be filing a racial impact statement and a fiscal impact. And so just sharing a draft of, actually if you can go back to the racial impact statement, sharing a draft of this is that this rule advances racial equity by requiring that voter registration materials distributed by the Division of Motor Vehicles under the Oregon Motor Voter Program be made available in addition to English in the 5 most commonly spoken languages in each county. And then for the fiscal recommendation, ORS 183-333 says if an agency appoints an advisory committee for consideration of a rule, the agency shall seek the committee's recommendations on whether the rule will have a fiscal impact, what the extent of that impact will be, and whether the rule will have a significant adverse impact on small businesses. So we wanted to include this to officially seek you, the RAC members, your recommendations on whether this rule will have a fiscal impact and what the extent of that impact will be, and whether it will have an adverse effect on small businesses. So we'll include that in the last slide, kind of the wrap up and our request for next week. Before we get to that, though, we have finished all of the materials for this week. We went through very quickly. Was there anything anybody wanted to go back over, talk about, hear some reasoning behind?
I think this week is fairly straightforward, so I want to make sure we cover those. If anyone does have any thoughts, I do want to share some more thoughts on last week's, just to get them out. But since this is this going to be our last meeting potentially?
Yeah, I think so. Like we've gotten through all the materials, so we're at the point where we're just kind of soliciting final feedback from RAC members. So yeah, now is probably the best time. If you have specific feedback from last week's materials, we can collect that now.
Yeah, we'll have probably some written things down because it's just a lot of, there's a lot in that last week that's new, and so we want to provide feedback or notes on kind of the impacts. There could potentially be fiscal impacts on some of those because it's a pretty significant change at the counter specifically. So if we are extending that transaction time at all, we'll have to think about the fiscal impact that could have. But I think the main things to point out, and I know Michelle can can also add in. But the notification piece, I think it started out kind of as a brief notification, and it's ballooned up a little bit in that proposal to also include some of those things like that we saw on the OMV mailer, where it said, the results of, what happens if you're not qualified. And I just feel like that piece, especially, we want to keep that notification pretty brief and use it more as like transparency rather than trying to like pull out of people like citizenship status. I just feel like that's a really uncomfortable potential result of that. And so I just would like that to be simplified a little bit more, because that's a difficult position for the customers and the staff. And I really like the idea of the OMV mailer having that language there to help people understand, and that's a much more comfortable place for them to decline rather than at the counter. And it's just difficult. I would like to have a way to discreetly, have people give us feedback. I can't think of that in that public space of a comfortable way for people to talk about citizenship. And so that part is just concerning, and for sort of the same reasons we talked about, not having a declination reason on that mailer, because it's like, okay, well, if we start getting into those details, it can get really quite sensitive. And so I think if we're not going to get it on the mailer, we shouldn't try to kind of get those out of people at the counter either. And it definitely would extend our transactions and potentially just kind of get us some questions that we aren't qualified to answer. So I think that notification piece, if we can try to simplify that, would be really helpful. And we can try to, put in some specific ideas to get at the intent.
Kat, and just to clarify, you're talking about the qualification notice, right? That's the particular piece that you're talking about. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and like the explainer, I think can have those details, and I think put as much detail as we can in those explainers so that if people have any questions, we can just give that to them and they have everything they need. They have, the website they can go to, and I would love if they could opt out on the, like have some sort of opt out option from that brochure, like a website they could go to pre-opt out, because I know we'll get people who are upset and want to opt out at the DMV, and we shouldn't do that for them. So not proposing that, but to give them something like an action they can take would be great, instead of saying, well, you just have to wait for the mail, because that's not a very satisfying answer to the people who are upset about it. So that's, I think, the biggest one. The EDVR piece.
Before we move on to the EDVR piece, I just want to make sure that in this discussion space here, the voter registration qualification process is what we're talking about here. And this came out of multiple RAC meetings where we were trying to identify ways to have potential non-qualified OMV participants be informed of what is happening and opt out in real time. And so just to make sure that we all understand what that piece is. And what was proposed in rule is that there is either a form presented on the screen or printed that every person that's going through the OMV process is notified in advance that they are going to have their data transmitted, and provide them the opportunity to confirm privately that they are not qualified, meaning maybe they aren't a citizen, or maybe they aren't an Oregon resident, whatever the reason may be. They're not saying I'm not a citizen, they're just saying I'm not qualified. Here are what the qualifications are. You are being registered to vote. Here are the impacts of registering to vote when not qualified. And then the person to be able to say, oh, I'm not qualified. That's what the process is. And that really would be that opportunity for folks who have been marked with a legal presence indicator of C. It's at the end of the transaction. The DMV representative has said, yep, you're a citizen, you're being registered to vote. And so what I'm hearing from you, Kat, is a way to simplify that transaction or that notification. And so just making sure that we're documenting that as moving forward. And interested to hearing from the group, is that important to you to have the opportunity for a person to know and be advised that they are being registered to vote? Or do you think that it is okay as long as they're notified at some point about it? I think if I summarize that, Kat, please jump in if I mis-summarize that piece, but this is a good place for that discussion.
Yeah, I think if it's like during the transaction, and maybe the place we thought it might most naturally fit is when someone's reviewing their transaction details. So we turn the screen towards the customer, and there's details like address, date of birth, their details that we have on their license, like their height and weight and things like that. And so at the bottom of that, I was thinking it would be a good spot if we just had something really simple like this transaction qualifies you for voter registration and your information will be sent to Secretary of State. Something fairly brief because otherwise they won't read it if it gets too long is the other thing. But then it's sort of the proposed language included also like here's the penalties for not being qualified to register to vote. And so it just turned into something quite a bit longer. And I think that will cause troubles. I understand wanting to have some sort of transparency of just letting people know this is going to happen. But it ended up feeling a little bit too much. That's what I was thinking.
I just want to kind of jump in there at the TSR level. There's no discreet way of somebody telling me that they don't qualify. I mean, even in a small office, it echoes. So whatever conversation is being had with the entire office. I can listen to everybody's conversations, and I'm actually trained to do that, to hear certain words that might be sounding threatening. So I understand the want for people to be able to tell us that something was amiss, and so that we need to go back. And so I think just the simple, this voter, this transaction is registering you to through the Oregon Motor Voter, that they can initiate the conversation, or we could even say, if you have any questions, please refer to Secretary of State, something to that effect, because that isn't our place necessarily for deciding if they qualify or not. So we really need to direct those conversations more privately with the Secretary of State versus DMV at the counter in front of everybody in the community. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, that's helpful. The reason that we said must be able to privately would mean that we would have to think outside of the box. It would be a button that they can push on the screen if they were using the screen, or a form that they're able just to check a box. The intention of privately would not be a discussion out loud in the DMV, which is why that we use that terminology based on the discussion that the RAC members had. It was meant to think outside of the box and kind of modernize this process that has been the same for many years. So the option to privately would be some sort of a form that they use, and they just check a box that say I'm not qualified and hand it back to the technician. That's private. Or if there was some sort of a QR code, like you mentioned previously, Michelle, where they scan a code and then read on their phone, and then on their phone there's some sort of a form where they could say like, oops, I'm not qualified, something like that, which we expected that there would be continued collaboration and discussion about. Now that we have the rules, how are we going to implement these, and how are we going to operationalize these changes? But just wanted to add that this is a really good conversation to have to figure out how to make things better. Appreciate it.
Is it possible that we can bring up the slides from last week that she's speaking of, so we can actually review it again since we have the time?
It's a good idea, Tracy. I'm sure we can.
Because it does cover a lot of slides, because I pulled up my copy of it, and it is very detailed.
Yeah.
It was a lot to digest, like you said,
yes,
Kat.
Yes. Yeah, I was like starting to have one thought, and then I was like, oh, another thing. So we'll try to capture as much as we can too, just in written feedback, so that you understand all the kind of considerations. But the idea of a discrete way to tell us that something's amiss. I think the other piece that we struggled with, and I've been thinking about this and talking with Michelle and talking with and I just can't come up with what we do with that information, because I don't know what they mean by they aren't qualified. Do I change their citizenship indicator? Because we use that for other things at the DMV, so I don't think we should be messing with it. Do we just kind of collect it and send it to Secretary of State and say, you decide what to do with it? I think it's just a little ambiguous, because we've also talked about people deciding they're not qualified for something, even though it's not really based in actual law. Like they might think, well, I have a felony conviction, so I can't vote, or I don't want to do jury duty, so I'm going to tell them I'm not qualified. I just think it's unclear what we do with that information and how. Yeah, especially because we can't specify the citizenship piece, and we shouldn't.
I think our way of, which was documented in the rules of making it unambiguous, is that if a person was to self-identify as not qualified, that the DMV would create a new legal presence indicator and then notify us of it in that way. But happy to hear ideas and thoughts about, the whole intent of this was to give folks the opportunity to pull themselves out if they were not qualified at the DMV, and then on the other side. And this is all addressing the potential non-citizen issues that occurred. So I think that Carol did pull the slides up, but Carol, if you share your screen, then we can get back to digging into the details there.
Let me know if I need to move a little further ahead. I think
it
starts at section 3.
Yeah, where slide number 12 is where we were currently discussing.
Give me 1 second.
And this is this particular section, this qualification notice, like Dina said, was direct feedback from RAC members, where everybody was saying, hey, we need more notification. And so we do want to acknowledge that we added a lot of notification. And what I haven't heard yet is any of our community advocates saying that's too much, or that's not enough, or that's just right. It would be really helpful to get some sort of feedback from non-agency employees about whether this feels like the appropriate amount. If we have a disclaimer on the transaction review screen, and we have an OMB explainer available in multiple languages, and the OMB mailer sent out to individuals, all include the penalties for not being for being registered when you're not allowed to, or when you're not eligible. Is that enough notification? Because being able to self-identify as not qualified was a direct recommendation, and so I'm just trying to hear that piece, because as public employees, we have difficult situations that we have to operationalize all the time, and we can figure out how to do that. But the whole purpose of this committee is to get feedback and recommendations from other stakeholders and advocates. So I guess I would look toward our nonprofit members on the group, where we landed on these notifications. Oh yeah, go ahead, Tracy, jump in, please.
Can we actually go back to slide 9? That's where section 3 begins, and it talks about prior to concluding the business, the DMV will start doing stuff. Yeah. Because I think it goes through the whole section 3.
Tracy, do you think it's a good idea just to kind of read through this? Because of the difficulties with the PowerPoint, we had to it's split up in between multiple. Do you think it'd be good just to review these next few slides together?
Yeah, section 3, because I believe that's pretty much what Kat's talking about. Is that correct, Kat? Is the process for qualified? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just read through this section again and then invite some specific feedback. So prior to concluding the business associated with a covered transaction, the DMV technician shall notify all apparently qualified qualified individuals, that it has been determined that they are qualified to register to vote, and that their information will be transferred to the Secretary of State for the purposes of voter registration as required by Oregon Revised Statute 247017. The voter registration qualification notice must be presented to an apparently qualified individual on a screen or on a form, and it must be part of the official transaction.
I do want to,
Oh, yeah.
I don't necessarily have an issue with that, the B part, about it being during the transaction. I just did want to note that other states have put something like a notification on a receipt, or I was thinking maybe the equivalent would be we print interim cards and maybe we could have some sort of notice on there. So that was just another option. I don't know that we have to do it that way, but I did realize that this language would limit us to during the transaction.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
I'm sorry if this is already covered. The term apparently qualified individuals, is that apparent qualification defined by what documents the individual has shown? So all of the people that would be included in Section 3A here have shown effectively documentary proof of citizenship, correct?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I'm at that point, I'm less concerned with, I mean, are we concerned that there are qualifications other than citizenship that they might want to identify?
Can I pause there for 1 second? Because I don't think that this means that. I think that this means that the person has a C, legal presence indicator. It does not mean an apparently qualified individual as anyone at the end of the transaction who has a C, legal presence indicator. And this could be somebody who registered years ago and was given the C, legal presence indicator, and might meet that legacy group of individuals who haven't provided documentation. So I just wanted to expand this discussion to include that. This would potentially identify folks who have a C legal presence indicator from any time in the past that are apparently qualified. And that's why we specifically chose this language. So at the end of a covered transaction at the DMV, the technician sees that you have a C legal presence indicator and you are going to be registered to vote, you would be presented with this voter registration qualification notice.
So just to confirm, there's no indicator that indicates citizenship, just legal presence, right? Which includes citizens and others here who are here, non-citizens who are here legally, correct?
I'll look to DMV for that.
Yeah,
if there
so
go ahead.
Repeat that question.
we do have a C. The C means citizen, and so that's coded based on the documents presented. And so the issue that is trying to be addressed here, one in part is just to notify somebody that they're being registered in general, but to notify and try to catch if somebody maybe was miscoded as a C, that they would notice at this point. And so it's not, there are not huge numbers of this probably, but we are concerned about the legacy data, and in response to the audit in our old system, where essentially we just don't have those scans readily available where we can pull them up. We have to go physically look at the records to see what they presented. So it's just, there's a higher chance that we would just not miss this error and it wouldn't get corrected. So this is one way of trying to address that.
So so C means citizen, not the broader legal presence. Okay. And am I also right that all those who are legacy registrants or legacy DMV records who might have had that in their file, wouldn't they have already been kind of processed through the OMV process long ago?
Typically, there would be a few exceptions, but yeah, because OMV has been around for 10 years and we have an 8-year cycle of licenses, most people have gone over. I think the times this wouldn't apply would be somebody who moved out of state. And so pre-2016, Maybe they got a license in 2015, they moved out of state, maybe they're just coming back now. That would be their first time in the
So
file.
what I'm trying to get at is whether this is such a rare use scenario that it probably doesn't warrant a whole process built around it. I don't know, because I don't know whether or not the number, what I'm basically hearing, I think there's going to be a small number of legacies, if any. There's going to be a very small number, presumably, of errors in the C designation. By the way, it'd only be a one-way error. Someone who is not a citizen, who shouldn't have been registered as a C. If someone was a citizen but was coded improperly, this wouldn't come up. So seems to me there's a very, it might be worthy of some research to get some assessment of the numbers here, because it's probably a very rare use case.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. The one of the concerns is we don't know the number of legacy records, and we are working with DMV now to identify that. So I think having that information and knowing exactly what we're looking at would be helpful. And absolutely hearing that if it is a small number, then this would be a step that might not need to be added. So thank you.
The other thing we can consider, and this is a whole other, discussion, but the audit did tell us to consider what we should do with our legacy records. So we can think about, do we only want to be sending something in the OMV file that we have a scan of, like our real IDs, or we have the option now of doing USPVS verification. So that's for our passports. So do we just not want to send over that old data anymore? We're willing to think about that. I think that would be more effective than trying to catch these at the counter. But I understand wanting to be thorough, because anything other than 0 errors is what we want. So yeah, it's a tough situation, but I do think that data probably cleanup is a more efficient way of approaching this problem.
Can we expand upon that a little bit? If you only send over records, how does that clean up records that we already have?
Yeah,
I think this would catch that. This would identify folks, individuals could self-identify that they're not qualified, and then if you assign them a unique legal presence indicator, then we could research them on our side. So the DMV not sending over records moving forward, that doesn't resolve the issue, I think, on this side. So just trying to share all of the information so we can make good decisions together.
Yeah, I think it does prevent us from perpetuating them, so keeping them more active. But yeah, you're right that it doesn't, those past, if it's already been sent as a registration and was wrong, the data cleanup part doesn't address that. No.
I don't think this addresses that, though, because if somebody comes to me and tells me I don't qualify, and we create a different indicator, that information would then not get sent over.
But we can go on in the rule here where it says that if that happens, you assign a legal presence indicator, it's reported. So this does go on to ask, like, prescribe the next few steps that hopefully get us to that point. But again, this was information informed by discussions here where we came up with a way to operationalize something. Absolutely, if there's another solution out there. Maybe we'll go through the next couple of slides.
Yeah, we can continue, because I think this section actually includes 3 different notifications to the affected individuals. So I think that's the important piece to start highlighting. So we're still talking about the voter registration qualification notice. So the Secretary of State shall develop, review, and evaluate the voter registration qualification notice at least once every 12 months. The DMV shall ensure that the current approved voter registration qualification notice is presented to every apparently qualified individual. The voter registration qualification notice shall identify the consequences associated with registering to vote when not qualified.
Yeah, just wanted to chime in real quick.
Yeah, please.
And I know earlier you asked to hear from the nonprofits to see if this was too much, too little, or just right. Personally, I think it's just right. I think this is an important safety net to be included. I understand that there's a lot of pushback, but I think it's necessary, especially with what Dina said, that there's a lot of legacy records. I know David thinks that there might be like a really small sample size and therefore it might not be needed, but really appreciate that comment and input from Dina saying that we don't actually know how many legacy records are in. I know when this whole situation started, I think it started with a couple hundred people, and then from what I know, it just kept snowballing, and there was more and more and more and more people who were incorrectly registered. So I think this is an important, crucial step. To what Kat said about providing notification on a receipt, I think that defeats the whole purpose of this, because I think during the transaction is a good point. Like post-transaction, information has already been gathered and sent. So I know that there are other points where people can opt out. But I'm just not totally on board with that, providing notice on a receipt once a transaction has been concluded.
Thanks, Ulysses. Really appreciate the feedback. Okay, we'll continue on with this voter registration qualification notice here. Next slide. So the voter registration qualification notice shall include a disclaimer that ORS 247-017 mandates voter registration for qualified individuals through the OMV process, and that qualified individuals will have the opportunity to opt out of registration later through a separate process. The DMV shall ensure that the voter registration qualification notice is available in the 5 most commonly spoken languages in each county other than English, as determined by the Secretary of State pursuant to ORS 251-167.
Yeah,
The
this is the
Yeah, go ahead,
this is the
Kat.
piece. I just think it's like it's so much just for that one notice. There's a lot of information we're trying to put in here, and the screen is honestly not even that big to, I feel like, to allow this, because like the most of it's taken up by the details of what is on someone's registration or credential, and so we'd have to like scroll down to like show another half of a page kind of with all this information. I think it would be, I don't even know if they'll read it. So I just think keeping it simpler will probably be better, and we can finesse it a little bit, but right now those are a lot of details to have on that screen.
Yeah, we'll get through I think it'd be important for us to also talk through the OMV explainer notification as well, and then maybe kind of look at those together and how they inform each other, how they serve the same purpose, how they serve different purposes. So let's continue on with the next slide. So the DMV technician administering the voter registration qualification process shall provide each apparently qualified individual with a discrete means to privately indicate they do not meet the voter registration eligibility qualifications. Individuals who indicate that they do not meet qualifications during the registration qualification process must be assigned a unique legal presence indicator in the Oregon License Issuance and Vehicle Registration System, Oliver, and they shall not be included in OMV. The identities of these individuals shall be protected by ORS 180-805 and ORS 180-810, and they shall not be disclosed other than to the Secretary of State for purposes of voter list maintenance. So that's the registration qualification notice. And we'll continue on in this rule where we talk about the explainer documents as well.
So
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Michelle.
So I guess I'm struggling a little bit with this as a administrator, the technician that's going to be giving this qualification, and everything that they're handing me tells me that they are a citizen, but that they don't want to be registered to vote, and the only option they have is to tell me that they don't qualify, but they want to continue with the transaction for real ID. I don't know how I'm supposed to make both of those true at the same time. Because it's not necessarily that they don't qualify, it's that they don't want to register to vote. And so that's where the conversation is going to be given, is they're going to go, oh, I'm being registered. I don't want to be registered. So I don't qualify because I don't want to be. And now I'm having a conversation of, you do qualify, you just don't want to, you can decline later. So I guess I'm struggling with trying to make both of those things true at the same time.
I
Because I'm not
would
going
love
to argue with somebody telling me that they don't qualify, because I don't know if they do. I'm not the Secretary of State. I can't make that determination. But I'm going to have to argue with them because they're handing me their passport or their birth certificate and they want real ID.
So I wonder if there's a way, Michelle, to make this work. You know, this is voter registration administrators drafting these rules, not the technicians that are there. So I'm sure that we can find a way to improve this system. And as an operationalizer myself, like I was like, what is this notice? What would this look like? So I drafted one up on a sheet of paper because the rule that we drafted says on a screen or on a sheet of paper. And it's just a one-page notice that says, you know, you appear to be a qualified citizen or qualified to register to vote. Here's what the qualifications are. Here are the penalties for registering to vote when you're not qualified. And then something just like, if you're not qualified, you must notify the technician now by checking this box and signing the form. By checking this box and signing the form, you are self-identifying yourself as not being qualified. Your DMV record will be updated to reflect that selection, and you will not be registered to vote. And then a notice that says this form must not be used for opting out. This section of the law says that you must be opted out. Like, I think there's a way to get that on paper. But the one piece that is sticking out to me is that you're saying that I'm being presented with what I know to be citizen documentation. So is there a way to make this be that this voter registration qualification notice is presented to folks that are not applying for a real ID to really narrow it down? Because that's how we could make that true, where when you are not presented with the information right in front of you, that you go to this route. So the process is, I appear in person, I present my documentation that is, you know, it proves that I'm a qualified individual for voter registration purposes. Then you don't have to go down this path. But in the event that there's a legacy record and you don't have the proof in front of you, that you go down this path.
I think I hear what you're saying. So like if they're coming in for a standard renewal or something where they're not handing me their legal presence, then they can. That would narrow down who's getting this notification by a lot. Would that also, we'd also have to make it so that people that had real ID in the past, because sometimes people do real ID and then they need a replacement, but they can't afford it. So they go back down to a standard, but we still have to scan documents for the 10 years.
So an individual that doesn't have, because from my understanding, DMV is unauthorized to scan in citizen documentation unless it is specific to a real ID transaction. So anyone that hasn't, where you don't have proof of citizenship on file would be the folks that might be.
We still put into the system what we've seen. So some people are getting a standard driver's license without us scanning it, but they are presenting their birth certificates. For example, a 17-year-old getting their permit for the first time, that is their identification to us, is their birth certificate for the majority of people. So they're getting a C, but they're only getting a permit, so they don't want to pay the extra 30. So they get a standard. So we're not scanning the documents. So
and I think part of the unknown legacy records is whether or not these controls were put in place when the form was filled out with the documentation that was being provided. And so when we start going down that slippery slope of if, when, this, that, like right now,
right. So from my understanding, there's only a short amount of time between when, so Oregon used to require, in order to get a driver's license or ID card, you had to be a US citizen.
They had to show legal presence.
They had to show legal presence, right? So they had to, or not just a citizen. So they'd get an L or a P or a C in order to even get ID. And that was and there was only a short amount of time between that requirement going away and then Real ID and Oliver. There's a very small amount of time that happened in between that. I don't know the years, but it was pretty short. I want to say was it even when Oliver went into effect?
Yeah, it was around the same time. I believe
It was around
like
the same
6 months,
time, right?
But
yeah.
But yeah, I think the programming would be pretty complicated, but I think as we're describing what this process looks like, and especially like having someone do some sort of indication that they don't qualify or that they do qualify, it feels a lot like the EDVR process. And it just sort of feels like it's defeating the purpose of OMV a little bit, which is that it's automatic and that we aren't doing a bunch of extra steps to register someone to vote. It just feels like it's ballooning up a little bit, going from a notification to an attestation that yes, I'm qualified. Even if it's just a verbal attestation, it just feels like it's not that different from the federal requirements that we offer the opportunity to vote.
That was not the point was not to attest to being a citizen. It was to allow a person to privately say I'm not qualified. And so there would be no requirement otherwise in compliance with the way that this was drafted. But a lot to operationalize here. It is good discussion. There is an issue that needs to be resolved. And that's what we're trying to get at. But I appreciate all of the conversation as we're going to have to figure out a way to be able to move forward where we're meeting the requirements of giving folks the opportunity to understand what's happening. And I think that we're getting there. We're getting there.
So I will note that essentially all of the requirements within this voter registration qualification notice, we are also doing in the OMV mailer, where we're also educating about that they are being registered, about the penalties for being registered when not qualified. So without jumping back and forth between the slides, we are hitting those pieces of information at multiple steps in the process. But again, I think it's important for us to cover this additional notice, this OMV explainer document, and see, again, whether it satisfies some of the requirements for the other one or not. So if we can continue on with this next slide. So at the close of each covered transaction, DMV technicians shall provide qualified individuals with an OMV explainer document created and approved by the Secretary of State. So not during the transaction, now we're after the transaction. The DMV shall ensure that the OMV explainer is available in the 5 most commonly spoken languages in each county other than English, as determined by the Secretary of State pursuant to ORS 251-167. The Secretary of State will review and update and provide the DMV with an electronic copy of the OMV explainer document at least once every 12 months.
I think for the at the close of each covered transaction, I think it will be, so we have like, I think, between 60,000, 70,000 covered transaction a month. If you think about that in terms of the number of brochures we'd be handing out, it's really intense. So I think that maybe some flexibility in this language about, we definitely have them available. If there's any questions, we hand them out, but it's not necessarily a default. That's something to consider.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll point out that there's nothing in this language that says they have to print a copy. They have to hand a physical copy to anybody. And this is where Michelle had brought up last week. Maybe this could be a digital. The rule seems permissible for that. Maybe you could have a selection of QR codes for different languages where somebody could just scan it and then they will have been given this OMV explainer document. So that might meet or help alleviate some of those concerns with, 60,000 pieces of paper a month. Okay, we'll continue on here. So the DMV will be responsible for printing and distributing the approved version of the OMV explainer. So I guess I did say that they had to be printed. So we'll look at this particular piece here. Okay, so that's two different documents, notices that we're talking about.
And
So
just so you're aware, those are going to happen within a minute of each other. Like, just so the screen turnaround conversation, then the last step is then payment, and then we go to the camera, and then the OMV explainer would be happening at that point once we concluded the transaction. Because that's the conclusion, is when we print out their interim card. And that's within a minute of each other. So we're having this conversation, and then we're having this conversation like 2 times in a minute, within a minute of each other.
And is there a way that you can operationalize that, where what we're proposing is 2 steps, that a person is being advised prior to the close of the transaction that you are being registered to vote. Here are the qualifications. Yep, that's done. They can privately check a box or do whatever they need to do. If it's a QR system with a formal, like a form that they go through on their phone in the language that meets their needs. And then when they're done, I believe you hand them a receipt. The receipt could potentially have a QR code that has all of the details related to it, so that, and so when you're saying that's 2 conversations within 2 minutes, maybe there's a way to bake those into the process where when you're turning the screen, I mean, maybe there's a way we can operationalize this so that it's not inconvenient, too inconvenient for the technician, but so that the person that's going through the process knows what's happening. With however technology can support us in that.
I totally agree with Dina. Seems like conversations the big topic here, and I don't think that it's 2 different conversations. It's just one different conversation. Here's the consequences, and after you can scan this QR code afterwards just to be reassured. I mean, don't understand why that's such a hotly debated topic right now. I think it's pretty intuitive.
So Ulysses, the reason it's complicated is because it's not a like one person to one person. It's one person to 50 people, 150 people, because everybody can hear every conversation. So it's not an individual conversation that I'm having, because so if there's somebody in the office that disagrees with the conversation, they're going to pipe up. And now I'm having a conversation with 2 people or 5 people or 10 people, and I'm bringing my manager in. And then I'm going to do it again when I walk over to the camera and I start that conversation again. So, and that's going to happen multiple times throughout my day. I have people yelling at me because I take their digital signature, and we have to call the cops because they demand that we take away their digital signature, which I can't do once they sign. So that's so now I'm initiating the conversation multiple times, and I'm going to have to de-escalate multiple times for just the one transaction.
go ahead, Tracy.
But is this second part actually a conversation? It just says that we need to give them the flyer, the explainer, period. Because you've already had the conversation with them. Yeah. And now this one is just when they're done with their transaction, here's your temporary ID. Here is rather paperwork that goes into the voter registration, period. I mean, if it's part of the sheet that the ID comes on, even if it just says something on there, they can scan and get more information about voter registration. You're not having that conversation with them. You're just giving them the paperwork. Or am I not reading this correctly?
What I think is different is that if I'm handing them information, they're going to ask questions. I'm the person.
Unfortunately, is the point we're trying to make, that people are being registered to vote and they have no idea. And I know it's going to be a huge culture change for DMV. and technicians. And as a former election administrator for 18 years, we too have really hard conversations at the counter with people that are unhappy about things quite often. And I don't wish it upon anyone, but trying to find a way to notify folks, make sure that they understand what's happening, and then trying to find a way to make it as inconvenient as possible for technicians at the DMV is what we're trying to do here. So
And I
what we're
appreciate
trying to
that.
do is identify some of the requirements and then provide DMV with the opportunity and flexibility to figure out how to operationalize these things.
And in terms of operationalize, that's more on the tech side. So I don't know what they can or cannot do on the technological side to make that happen or not happen. And I'm just looking at it from the person that's going to have those conversations on a regular basis daily, and what outcome that's going to create.
All right. So I know that we're not going to solve this today for this particular section, but I'm glad that we had this extra conversation. When we solicit feedback from RAC members, what I would say is we will send out the full rules in a Word document, so it's a little easier to navigate than the PowerPoints, and would just ask that each RAC member spend some time and try to consider all of these different pieces and provide that feedback together about whether it's accomplishing the goal, whether it's too rigorous or something like that. We still have a little bit more time. Kat, were there other things that you wanted to talk about other than the notices specifically?
Yeah, I think we could go through a number of the slides and we probably have some minor comments, but I'll try to, the other bigger thing I was thinking of was the switching of the EDVR as we approach a registration deadline. It does seem out of scope of OMV in a way, because now we're starting to talk about this other requirement. We're not talking about turning OMV on or off. We're talking about EDVR, and that's a separate process. So as much as I'm sympathetic to wanting to, figure out what to do during that gap where people aren't going to be registered in time, I'm not sure that that's the solution. Right now, what we do is we put up posters, and if folks ask about voter registration, we tell them that they're not going to be registered in time for the deadline and they need to go online, or we have the cards available. And I'm not sure, because what is going to happen if we do EDVR is that, so we're going to then be asking everybody who is getting automatically registered, we're also going to be asking them if they want to register to vote. And we have about a 10% opt-in for that. Last time I looked, most people are already registered. So most people are going to say no, and then we're registering them anyway. I just think it's confusing. In addition to kind of the concern about, is it even within the scope of these rules, and the programming piece. So that's just another big one where I totally understand the intent, but I don't think this is the way we're going to solve that problem.
Can I ask, Kat, when you say maybe the intent was documented wrong, that we're going to offer them the opportunity and then they're going to say no, and then we're going to do it anyway? Does that mean, I'm not sure where to go to on this slide, but I think the way it was written is that during this 30 days before the deadline to register to vote, the technician shall advise them and then offer them the opportunity to use EDVR. And if they say, no, I'm already registered, there was no intention that, maybe I'm confused about that point.
Well, if they're already, because we're talking about offering this to people who are OMV qualifying. And so then they just go in OMV. So that's what I'm confused about, is we're asking them.
Oh, they go in OMV in 30 days after. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it'd be delayed, but they're,
yeah.
So I think it's a little confusing and a little bit.
And the challenges on your side, is it would be, well, I guess the challenges aren't necessarily the deciding factor, but it's a programming challenge. And then, so to be able to program 4 times a year for a change in the system, is that what it would take? Okay.
Yeah, it's quite significant because we have to change all the criteria for which we ask that EDVR question. And to do that multiple times a year is quite a lot. It's very significant programming. We don't just have a switch where we can say, all right, now we ask this group of people EDVR. So it's pretty complicated.
And I do want to say that the conversation that I have at the counter is you're going to be registered through OMV. However, it's not going to get you registered in time for this next election. If you want to be registered for this next election, here are your options, which is going on to Secretary of State's website, or fill out this card and hand it back to me. Most people will do one or the other if they want to or not. That was their choice. And so I don't know if it's necessary for us to then add the electronic version on our pad at that point, because that's the Secretary of State one as well. So we do already offer it verbally, and we do have to say that verbally to every person.
Okay, and there's not, so in that moment, if you say you're not going to be registered to vote now, but you could do it right now during EDVR, or we can do it right now instead of you saying go online, but that would take programming to
Right.
make the EDVR program enabled.
Right. And then we'd have to shut it back down and then re-enable it later. Like it wouldn't be just on all the time. And it's not a choice that the technician has. It has to be baked into Oliver. It's not something I can turn on or off based off of the conversation.
That's helpful. So it does absolutely depend on programming to make it available for a specific group of people in a specific period of time.
Right. And then reprogram it to exclude them later.
This is so helpful because in the very beginning, if we go back to like the first or second RAC meeting, I know Ann and I walked away like, yeah, go into EDVR 30 days before the deadline solves everything. And I thought that's the page we were all on. So I'm curious to hear maybe this was a big one for Ann and I and for all of our election officials who have been at the counter with that person who shows up and there's no ballot to give them because they swear that they were registered at the DMV. And then we can give them a provisional ballot, but it's not going to count because they didn't meet the deadline and Oregon doesn't have same day voter registration. So this is the same kind of the reverse. This is what all local election officials have people crying at the counters in front of us because they're not able to vote. And they thought they were registered because they went to the DMV in time. So this is a good conversation to have to hear about the technical stuff that's prohibiting the technician from being able to turn on EDVR or understanding the difficulties with the system. It still feels like a good solution in absence of statewide voter registration.
I think we can offer the verbal equivalent and have the voter registration cards, which we already do during that time. The EDVR programming is, the person at the counter can't control that when that pops up, and it's sent to that pin pad at the counter, so they can't initiate that. It's programming we have to do on the back end.
Yeah, Kat, one of the things I heard is that this conversation is already happening, but like local election officials are still dealing with the miscommunication or the lack of understanding from individuals. Like that's a very real issue with OMV. And so that's what we were trying to solve with this around the voter registration deadlines. So yeah, maybe we can work on this a little bit more, but I don't think that the status quo is working in this particular situation. So we do need something different with these extra notifications. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. With this last round of elections that happened in November, did you guys still have that issue?
November wasn't a statewide election, so I don't think that that would be it. The next one that we're coming up on is the primary election, which that one's pretty crucial with the
Right.
30 days. Tracy, did you want to add into that? I saw you put your hand. Oh, you're just
Yeah.
agreeing. Okay, sure.
I'm just agreeing. Yes, that one is extremely crucial just because of the party registration deadline is different than actual registration deadline in a sense. You have to be registered and a party chosen within that before that 21 day deadline. You cannot change your party after that.
So would it be possible that we talk about maybe doing this for the primary elections versus the special elections? Kind of do a compromise where we're not changing it 4 times a year, but maybe once a year for a short amount of time? You know, that, I mean, it's still a lift, but it's not as frequent of a lift. I don't know, Pat, chime in on that one. I'm trying to figure out
I'm
how
not
to.
sure how long it takes, but I think that would be, if we had to choose something, that would be preferable. But yeah, we could also, I mean, if we want to consider a statutory change in making the process faster, we could consider that too. But I know we can only make it so much faster.
And I would say definitely May and November are the 2 most common, and it's almost common every year. Just unusual that some of us, like me, this was the first November I have not had to do an election for a county, and that's feels very strange. But most of the time, yes, it's in November, and there's always a May.
And I would add that one section that follows this discussion refers to what standard elections are. So that could be defined as the May special district elections, a May primary election, and November midterm and presidential elections. Those are all defined. Just as we continue to find a system and a solution that works for Oregonians.
Yeah, I think we would be willing to be flexible to help navigate whatever technical challenges are there. And if it means that we're just doing this for the big elections, I mean, we'll take incremental progress, I think. All right, we'll add some notes to that section. Okay, any other pieces that the RAC members wanted to discuss?
Give me 1 second, but if anyone else has any other thoughts, go for it. That first section too, I did just want to, I wanted to flag because I think the intent was to support TSRs and the when we talk about having those different groups of documents displayed. And I think maybe the context y'all were missing is that we have that available electronically. And I think Michelle mentioned that, but yeah, maybe you just didn't realize that. But so we have it baked into the system that we put different documents into different buckets and with different legal presence indicators. But we also have that available online, and TSRs are very used to looking at resources on our internal webpage. So I think I mentioned at some point that it wasn't publicly available, but I just got that information that I sent about about these different sort of categories. I just copied and pasted that from that document online that the TSRs have access to. So I don't think it needs to be, physically available at counters. But if there's something else we were concerned about, I think the intent of it, I wasn't totally sure of.
So is there, so this came up from early on RAC meetings where the discussion was like each TSR needs to have this information available. And yeah, absolutely, you guys are the subject matter experts of what's in the process. But is there a document that currently exists that identifies forms of evidence that are indeterminate with respect to citizenship? And is there a document containing instructions and guidance regarding the presentation of identity documents issued by United States territories as they relate to determinations of citizenship and voter eligibility? Do those two exist? Because what I'm hearing exist is 1 and 2 documents that there's a drop down in these
for TSRs, or are you talking about for citizens?
for
Or
TSRs.
for TSRs?
Yeah.
It's not a document. Well, it's a list that we have. Yes. Yeah, we have a document that we have a whole chapter in our policy that goes over all of this.
So maybe
That's our
understanding.
document.
Yeah. We
And
talked
and
through
it's
this.
ever evolving, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we just don't print them out anymore to save paper.
Yeah. I
Right,
think I
so-
remembered.
We just don't have it available in that format for customers to hand over to customers. Like,
The expectation here was not to have something presented for customers. Through the RAC discussion, there was this need or this understanding from RAC members that they wanted to make sure that TSR technicians had the resources available to make determinations about citizenship. And so what I understand is there are the drop downs available. A customer comes in, they present documentation, and the system is built to put them in the right bucket. But I didn't know whether or not in the meetings where we asked for the types of documentation and things of that nature, I don't think that was made clear potentially.
yeah, Kat had brought it up and showed it on our screen. Some of the lists that we have.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have one that conclusively disproves U.S. citizenship. Like, I don't know what that list would be. Everything that doesn't include U.S. citizenship would be like astronomically large, right? We don't have something that conclusively disproves U.S. citizenship. Like, what in your mind would that be?
That was taken from a RAC member. So this is not coming from my mind. I didn't generate this up. This was if you go back to some of the earlier meetings, there was discussion about having resources available to technicians of what proves citizenship, what disproves citizenship, and then the indeterminate documents that are presented that would drive someone to EDVR. And then specifically knowing for technicians how to treat the documents presented by the territories. But David, I saw you come on camera, and this I think started with
I mean, I'm a little bit confused. I mean, if an individual chooses to show a green card or a visa, doesn't that conclusively disprove U.S. citizenship?
Unless they also hand you a U.S. passport, because since they got the green card, they also became a citizen.
Well, why would they show their green card when the passport suffices? The green card is completely irrelevant at that point.
But I've had it happen because they bring
I know,
everything.
but wouldn't
because they bring everything.
Wouldn't the clerk just take the most recent form of document? So
yes.
To me, this only, I mean, again, I think we can't possibly investigate all the possible use cases that might be extremely rare. But if someone brings you their box of documents and in there is a current U.S. passport, that's the one that's gonna be applied, right?
Right. Yes. 100%.
So I think I think that second one only relates to an instance where the only documentation is a document that indicates non-citizenship.
Right. Yes, but that would be everything that doesn't establish citizenship, basically. But that's a lot of documentation. That's all foreign passports, all foreign birth certificates from every country, right?
See, I would say a foreign birth certificate is neither. That's 3. You could be born foreign and still be a U.S. citizen. You could have a natural.
But you can have your document of birth abroad, or you could have the state would show that you were born out of country. So there
Yeah, but
are
it's-
documents, right?
Yeah, but it sounds like everything fits pretty easily into one of these three categories, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. But I just don't have a list of every single possible conclusively disproving citizenship form, because it's pretty much anything that's not conclusively establishing U.S. citizenship would go under that document of disproving, essentially, or indeterminate. And then that's a conversation that we have with
Yeah,
with
I think
our
this one,
customers.
this is the one, number 2 is just the one that doesn't quite match, because we usually will
Right.
put it in some other bucket, right?
Right.
Like we might say they're a
Yeah.
legal permanent resident, and not,
Right.
they're not a citizen. Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
that's the only piece that's a
Yeah,
little bit
either
different.
a non-citizen or a permanent resident, or yeah, those are pretty much it. Or we have the Samoa, that's an A, but which is non-citizen. But so yeah, we do have different buckets. We do have documentation, policies that show what we can accept and we can't accept. If it's something that's not our normal, then we take it up to just get guidance and making sure. We do have documentation about U.S. territories, and the determination for citizen versus voter eligibility. And then my brain automatically thinks of our territories, like the Samoa, as well as Puerto Rico. So we do have that. We just don't necessarily have it printed out because it gets updated quite frequently when something new comes across our plate. So we do have that. So that's fine. I just don't necessarily have one that conclusively disproves U.S. citizenship list necessarily.
Yeah, we'll look at that section again because I know that there was concerns expressed about requiring them to be prominently displayed at each workstation.
Yeah. Well,
and-
I mean, as long as you think that prominently displayed is available via our internal policies, that's easy for us to get to. It's a pretty clear list. I mean, Kat had brought it up. I think she had shown the list that we see on a regular basis.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on last week's rules?
On the I'm having another thought. The pixels for the signatures, could
Sure.
you guys check that that's what you're receiving on your signature? Because I want to make sure it's not being converted or something.
Yeah, so Kat, you had sent me those specifications and I did confirm that we were getting the same size that you had said. So yeah, we took that requirements directly from your feedback.
Okay, great.
Okay, so Carol, I'll ask if we jump back over to the other slide deck and we can go ahead and bring up the final slide, which talks about next steps. Thank you. So at the conclusion of this meeting, we will send RAC members, like I said, the full draft rule in a Word document so it's easier to navigate and add feedback. We would ask that you provide feedback, comments on the rules, and then also the fiscal impact recommendation by 10:30 next week. So we've gone through all of our materials, so we will not meet next week. This will be our last RAC session. And so by the end of when next week's session would have ended, that's when we would like to have your feedback all returned to us. We will take that, and we have about a week or so to incorporate that feedback, and we will get the rules submitted by November 25th. That means that the draft rules will be published and public comments will be available and beginning December 1st. At the time that that rule is published and the public comment period opens, we will send out the Gov delivery notice about that, which will also include the dates and time of the public hearing. We're estimating that's likely going to be the first week of January. And the end of this tentative timeline is the adoption date, the effective date of those final rules, which right now we're looking at toward the end of January, January 20th. So those are some estimate timelines and an overview of the remaining steps of this process. Any questions, anything from RAC members on next steps? Okay. So that will conclude the RAC on the Oregon Motor Voter Rules. We thank you all, RAC members, for attending and participating and speaking up and bringing your perspectives. We really value it and look forward to the opportunity to review the feedback and comments that you have once you actually get the chance to look at the rules on paper as one full document. Yeah, really just thank you so much for bringing your expertise and your experience and perspective to this. I think the public policy is going to end up being a much better place at the end of this process than it was at the beginning.
Thank you, guys. That was great.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.